The Lemoyne Raiders are one of Red Dead Redemption 2's most chilling and thematically loaded factions, and they do a lot of heavy narrative work that people often miss. On the surface, they show up as violent insurgents, guerrilla fighters who ambush, burn, and terrorize the countryside. But when you look closer, they're Rockstar's way of exploring what the post-Civil War South really felt like. Fractured, violent, resentful, and unwilling to accept the new order. They're not just enemies to shoot, they are a social force, and understanding them sheds light on the world the Linde gang wanders through. First, their origins and motives. The Raiders are rooted in the collapse of the Confederacy and the chaos of Reconstruction. They're made up of men left behind by history, ex-soldiers, dispossessed planters, criminals, and opportunists who realize that law and order now works against them. Their ideology is less about coherent political theory and more about revenge and survival. They lash out at anything that promises change. Freed black communities, federal agents, the infrastructure of a modernizing South. That mixture of revenge and opportunism explains a lot of their behavior in the game. They'll torch property one day, rob a train the next, and commit atrocities against civilians simply because the power structure that once protected them is gone. Tactically, the Raiders favor classic insurgent methods. They operate in small bands rather than as a centralized army. They know the swamps and backroads intimately, and they use ambushes, hit-and-run raids, and intimidation campaigns to keep regions destabilized. That makes them terrifying opponents for any organized force. For the Linde gang, who are used to blunt force and charisma, the Raiders represent an enemy that cannot be confronted on straightforward terms. You can't negotiate with a system of splinter cells. You can't shake hands with a leader and end the problem. The Raiders force the gang to choose between escalation and avoidance, both of which have heavy costs. Importantly, the Raiders aren't separate from the rest of Lemoyne's social tensions. They amplify them. They exploit local feuds, they partner with corrupt interests when convenient, and they prey on towns that are trying to rebuild. In the game, that dynamic is visible in how the Raiders inflame the Braithwaite-Gray conflict, and how violence in the countryside makes everyday trade and life impossible. The presence of the Raiders helps explain why towns like Rhodes have such brittle civility. On the surface, things appear normal, but underneath, people live with the constant threat of violence. Rockstar uses this to underline the fragility of the post-war social order. There's also a racial element that can't be ignored. The Raiders are often hostile toward freedmen and black communities, and that hostility is both ideological and instrumental. Violence toward black families achieves two goals for the Raiders. It asserts a perverse sense of control, and it destabilizes communities that might otherwise provide mutual aid or political resistance. That racial terror is part of what makes Lemoyne feel so poisonous. This isn't just about banditry, it's about a social impulse to preserve a vanished hierarchy by any means. What goes wrong strategically for the Raiders is the same thing that ultimately undoes most insurgencies. They lack a sustainable political program. Their actions terrorize, but they don't build alternatives. Where the Linde gang sometimes dreamed, delusionally, of a new way of life, the Raiders only offer a return to the past. That means their victories are always temporary. Massacres and raids produce fear, not governance. And because they rely on randomness and brutality, they eventually provoke stronger, better organized responses. Government patrols, bounty hunters, and local militias that gradually squeeze them out or push them into darker desperation. For the Linde gang, encounters with the Raiders are corrosive. They force the gang into morally compromised decisions, brutal reprisals, and alliances of convenience that erode the group's internal cohesion. These fights also show the limits of Dutch's romantic rhetoric. There is no noble rebellion here, only the ugly, petty violence of men refusing to die quietly. In that sense, the Raiders function as a narrative mirror. They reflect the worst outcome of clinging to an idealized past, and through confrontation with them, the gang's dream is further delegitimized. Finally, they're important, because they remind players that RDR2's world is not simply a backdrop for outlaw heroics. This is a society in trauma. The Raiders are the symptom and the cause of that trauma. You can kill a dozen of them in a mission and feel momentary victory,